The way that Ukrainians have dealt with the Soviet past, the way that they have dealt with the imperial past has been interesting. Of course, there are moments of complete rejection, which are understandable, and there are moments of total condemnation of particular Stalinist policies, with which I completely agree. But there is also a willingness to accept what people in the West like to call hybridity. There's also a willingness to accept that people might speak a couple of languages and that code switching might be a normal part of everyday life. That is particularly Ukrainian. No one else really does that. Now, Russia's a different story, and I'm not going to dwell on it except to very briefly say that obviously the democratic succession never succeeds in this version of Russia. Instead, we have a version of tyranny. We seek for words to describe this thing in Russia, but I actually think the ancient Greek word tyranny applies very beautifully to the situation of a single man ruling, aging, ever more entrapped by illusion, seeking after some kind of grand project that will make him immortal. This is a war over time. This is a war about time. It's a war about whether we have to die because of what one man thinks about what happened 1,000 years ago or more. Past events do not predetermine, to use Mr. Putin's word, they do not predetermine the present. There is no one person who can say that past predetermines who belongs to what nations and why. This is also a war of memory about the 1930s and 1940s. Mr. Putin is interpreting the Second World War to mean that essentially Hitler and Stalin were right in 1939. This is also a war about empire in a very general way. When Mr. Putin says that there's no Ukrainian state and there's no Ukrainian nation, that language might be unfamiliar in the West, but it is the language of European colonialism for the past 500 years. This is also a war about destruction and genocide. And finally, and this is the most historical point, this is a war about resources. It matters a great deal that Ukraine has its black earth. It matters a great deal whether Ukraine wins, and one way that it matters is whether the world will be fed this fall or not. We're looking at the possibility of tens of millions of people starving to death beyond Ukraine because of the Russian blockade of the Black Sea. I would say the stakes are the future at all. Is there a future? Is there a political future? Will we be able to think about the future? If a hydrocarbon oligarch wins a war funded by his profits from hydrocarbons, where are we in fighting global warming? If the hydrocarbon oligarchs shape the world literally by destroying their neighbors, is it thinkable that we can then get past hydrocarbons and into a world without global warming?